That year was a year full of darkness and absolute despair for the children of Israel. They were utterly defeated and exiled from their homeland to live in the strange land of Babylon. By the still waters of the Chebar River, a young priest named Ezekiel sat immersed in infinite sorrow. He had just turned 30 years old but had no temple in which to serve his God. Surrounding him were the bitter weeping and wailing of a nation that thought God had completely abandoned them. The Babylonian sky at that time was gray and carried a suffocatingly melancholic atmosphere. But then one day, that quiet sky suddenly tore open before Ezekiel's astonished eyes. A massive storm carrying destructive power rolled in fiercely from the northern horizon. Inside that gigantic cloud was a brilliant fire flashing continuously without any pause. Radiant light like glowing amber emitted a terrifying heat from the core of that horrific fire. From the midst of that blinding fire emerged 4 living creatures with incredibly bizarre and terrifying forms. They had the upright posture of human beings, but each creature possessed 4 different faces. The front face was human, the right side was a lion, the left side was a bull, and the back was a mighty eagle. Each creature possessed 4 giant wings with 2 wings spread out touching each other and 2 covering their bodies. Hidden beneath those wings were human hands waiting to act upon command. Their legs were completely straight without knee joints and flashed blindingly like newly polished bronze. They moved straight forward as fast as lightning without needing to twist their bodies or turn their heads. Between these creatures were burning coals of fire darting back and forth carrying destructive energy. Right beside each mysterious creature was a massive wheel touching the dusty ground. Their structure was incredibly complex with the appearance of one wheel intersecting transversely inside another wheel. The rims of these wheels were toweringly high and filled with unblinking eyes that saw through souls. These wheels moved in perfect unison with the creatures because their spirits were merged as one. Above the heads of the creatures was a giant crystal firmament that was blindingly bright and terrifying. The sound of their wings flapping echoed like roaring waterfalls and rumbled like an army marching into battle. Above that crystal firmament was a sparkling throne glowing with the deep blue color of sapphire stone. Seated on the powerful throne was a radiant and majestic figure taking the likeness of a man. The upper half of his body glowed like molten metal and the lower half was blinding like a consuming fire. A brilliant band of light resembling a rainbow after a heavy storm surrounded that majestic throne. That was the great glory of the Lord of the universe manifesting right in the middle of the dark land of exile. Ezekiel was so terrified that his knees went weak and he fell face down to the ground, not daring to look up. A voice rang out as powerfully as thunder calling him Son of Man to stand up immediately. The Spirit of God instantly entered Ezekiel's body and lifted him to stand firmly on his feet. God declared that he would send him to a stubborn nation drowning in deep rebellion. An invisible hand reached out from the void carrying a mysterious rolled-up parchment scroll. The inside and outside of that parchment scroll were completely covered with lamentations and the most tragic judgments. God commanded Ezekiel to open his mouth and swallow that scroll of judgment deep into his stomach. Strangely, upon swallowing it, that bitterly cursed scroll tasted as sweet as pure honey. God warned that the people of Israel would plug their ears and refuse to listen because their hearts had turned to stone. But he would make Ezekiel's forehead harder than flint stone to bravely confront them. The Spirit lifted Ezekiel high into the air again and brought him back to the desolate settlement of the exiles. He sat dazed on the ground and remained completely mute for 7 consecutive days in sheer shock at what he had seen. After that, God spoke again and officially appointed him to become a watchman for the house of Israel. God took away his voice, making him mute and only able to open his mouth when granted a prophetic word. Instead of using words, Ezekiel had to use his own physical body to express the painful prophecies. He took a rough clay brick and carved the detailed image of the city of Jerusalem upon it. He personally built miniature siege walls and watchtowers around that inscribed brick. A cold iron pan was set up as an eternal wall separating him from the model city. God commanded him to lie completely motionless on his left side for 390 grueling days. Upon completion he had to turn over and lie on his right side for another 40 painful days. Every single motionless day corresponded to a year he had to bear the sins of the nations of Israel and Judah. Throughout that time a supernatural force held him down, making it impossible for him to move or turn over. His daily food ration was only a tiny pinch of various grains mixed together. His drinking water was also measured drop by drop, simulating the extreme thirst of people under siege. Even more terrifying was that he had to bake that bread over burning cow dung before everyone's curious eyes. This shocking action symbolized the extreme defilement and deprivation that the citizens of Jerusalem would have to endure. After the series of physical torments, God gave the prophet a new and extremely barbaric command. He had to use a remarkably sharp battle sword to shave off all the hair and beard on his head. He carefully used a weighing scale to divide those chopped hairs into 3 portions of equal weight. 1/3 was fiercely burned in the middle of the city model, symbolizing a painful death by famine and plague. 1/3 was violently hacked to pieces with the sword, symbolizing warriors falling in a bloody battle. The final third was tossed into the air and blown away by the wind, symbolizing refugees forced to flee. Only a few tiny strands of hair were secretly and carefully hidden inside the fold of his cloak. That was the poignant symbol of an incredibly small group of survivors who would overcome the descending wrath. The 6th year of the exile brought another horrifying and haunting vision for Ezekiel. The fiery, powerful hand of God grabbed him by the hair and yanked him flying high into the air. In a brief flash of a moment he was teleported back to the sacred temple in the city of Jerusalem. Right at the northern gate of the temple stood an incredibly hideous and blasphemous pagan idol. God led him to dig a wide hole through the hard stone wall to look deep into the secret chambers. In the dark shadows, 70 highly respected elders were stealthily burning incense to heretical animal paintings. They naively and foolishly believed that God could not see their filthy crimes in the pitch darkness. The climax of betrayal was 25 men blatantly turning their backs toward the holy sanctuary. They faced the east and prostrated on the ground, worshipping the sun right inside God's most sacred place. And then the most heartbreaking scene in the entire religious history of Israel began to unfold. The brilliant glory of God slowly lifted from the throne seated among the holy cherubim angels. The cloud of glory slowly moved away from the threshold of the temple he had inhabited for centuries. The angels took flight carrying the blazing wheels, and the glory of God departed forever. That divine glory stopped on the eastern mountain and completely abandoned the sinful city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was now merely a hollow, empty corpse waiting for its inevitable destruction to strike. Not long after, an escaped man covered in wounds brought the devastating news to the exiles in Babylon. The proudly great city of Jerusalem had officially fallen and been destroyed to a desolate flatland by the enemy. But hope had not been completely extinguished within the forgiving heart of God. The Spirit lifted Ezekiel again and dropped him down into a massive valley nestled between the mountains. This valley of death was overflowing with dry and stark white human bones scattered all the way to the horizon. God raised his voice to ask Ezekiel if these deadly dry bones could ever be brought back to life. He obeyed God's command and raised his voice, starting to prophesy to those motionless fragments of bone. A deafening loud noise echoed and the bones began to shake violently across the ground. They automatically crawled toward each other and snapped together with perfect precision down to the smallest joint. Networks of blue sinews began to tightly grip the bones and raw red flesh gradually layered over the bodies. A layer of brand new human skin covered those bodies, but they still lay motionless without breath. Ezekiel continued to spread his arms, calling strong winds from the four corners of the earth to bring the breath of life. Thousands of paralyzed bodies suddenly opened their eyes simultaneously and stood up straight on the dusty ground. They became an immensely vast and intensely alive army before the tearful, astonished eyes of the prophet. Those dry bones were the absolute true reflection of Israel losing all their hope in the place of exile. God promised with absolute power to open the lids of their graves and lead them safely back to their ancestors' land. The final magnificent vision of Ezekiel was a detailed golden blueprint of a spectacularly new temple. From beneath the threshold of that new holy temple emerged a tiny stream of crystal clear water. That stream kept rising and expanding endlessly until it transformed into an incredibly deep swirling river. Wherever this river flowed into dead lands, all creations flared up with an unstoppable intense vitality. Schools of sparkling fish swam freely and heavily laden fruit trees grew in rows along both banks of the river. The leaves of those miraculous trees never withered and were used as medicine to heal all diseases of the world. The powerful river flowed straight into the bitter Dead Sea and turned those toxic waters incredibly sweet. The new city rose brilliantly from the ashes with 12 pearly gates named after the 12 tribes. The most wonderful and touching thing was that the name of this eternal city would forever be called "The Lord is there."